Peace and love, family. How is everyone tonight? Thank you for joining us on another edition of the RAM Book Club, Researchers of the African Mind, where we seek to liberate African minds by reading one unit of work at a time. My name is Lily La-Poete Speaks. As you know, we are starting with The Blueprint for Black Power by Baba Amos Wilson. We have been rolling through, family. We have been rolling. We are on chapter 15 now. Last week we did the monster, of course, chapter 14. Race and economics, and we talked about social relations and economics. We talked about global economics, and he focused a lot about work at a time. My name is Linda.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we are starting with
Find where it's at here.
By Baba Amos Wilson. What is happening?
Oh, mute me. I'm like, if I find it.
Okay. I'm like, okay, there it is. Okay, it's gone now. Okay, sorry, family, technical difficulties. Okay, yeah, but we did race and economics last week. This week, we are in chapter 15, Africa Agonistes, I believe. I'm not really sure if that's how you pronounce it, family. But we're going to be talking about dangerous economic straits of contemporary Africa, the impoverishing of Africa, benign neglect of Africa by world community, self-inflicted wounds of Africa at home and abroad, the planned suffering of Africa, the French challenge. We'll talk about the open markets, open shelves, most favored nations, and we'll also talk about African-American monoculture. Once again, my name is Lee La-Poete Speaks. I am the author of Perceptions of a Misplaced African, Volume 1, available at lilylappoetespeaks.com, which is where you will also have to go to get the links for the show if you would like to join the panel or if you would like to just be in the discussion. We're going to let the panel introduce themselves, and then we're going to get started off for this week. And thank you once again for joining us.
Peace, love, and light. My name is Dr. Deanna Bailey, also known as dr.maat.msu. I am the co-founder of Ed Anime Productions, a company that was created to produce educational tools for children, and in particularly children of color. I'm also the executive producer of Meltrek. I'm also an adjunct professor over at the School of Engineering at Morgan State University. I teach digital communications and also wireless communications at the graduate level. Thanks for joining us. I'm looking forward to this discussion. I know before we went live, Brother Travis said he thought that Sister Alima and I will be home playing with our toys. Or I told him, I said, man, you know, we're African-centered women, and not saying that if you participate in, in Christmas that you're not. But I said, no, we're African-centered women, and we're also deeply committed to this book club. As Sister Alima stated earlier, we've been going strong. I mean, this is a very heavy book, okay? We're looking at about 868 pages, and this was our first text. So we didn't start, no disrespect to the 10 little books, but we didn't start with, Know Thyself by Naeem Akbar, a little 100-page book. We started with an 868-page book, and this is a heavy book, and we're combing through chapter by chapter. I'm so excited. We're in chapter 15, so we're almost, half the way through the book. Yeah, and so I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Dr. Amos Wilson, he always brings, powerful. He always provides us with powerful information, life transforming information, and so I'm looking forward to this discussion. I'm gonna go ahead and pass the mic to Brother Travis or Sister Camille so they can introduce themselves.
Hey, peace, family. Oh, go ahead, Travis.
No, go ahead, Sister Camille.
I got a mad echo. What's happening?
Yeah, somebody's echoing.
Let me see. Let me turn off this YouTube. Might be YouTube.
It might be YouTube. Yeah, I had to turn mine off.
Oh, let me
get rid of all this YouTube. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better, sis.
Okay. Peace, family. My name is Camille Gaynor Jones. I'm a professional drummer, musician, and an educator. I'm honored to be here each and every week with the family and trying to educate everyone in our community so we can uplift one another and lead a life of fulfillment. And I'm honored to be here with everyone on the panel, and thank you for tuning in.
Peace, family. This is Brother Travis from Detroit. I'm an IT professional here, working cybersecurity. I also do Facebook marketing and other various platforms. Thanks for tuning in. This is a powerful group. I can foresee us again in the future reading some heavy material, continue to evolve. Dr. Amos Wilson was a deep thinking elder, and I just love the group, and I'm just looking forward to getting started tonight here.
Sure. Yes, indeed.
Look, I didn't want to say anything when he said I want to put out there that Dr. Amos Wilson was a real psychologist. He was actually a clinical.
That's right.
I just wanted to say that.
Dr. Ma, you petty.
Your brother Umar's in the news. Y'all heard about Dr. Umar?
Oh, no. Actually, we haven't, Brother Travis. You messed with Brother Travis. Brother Travis, you on the low. But no, we haven't heard of
it. He been in the news.
Oh, yeah, we haven't heard anything about that. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, Dr. Amos Wilson was definitely, he was definitely a clinical psychologist.
Yes, he was.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, for folks who wanna know. So
yes,
just wanted to throw that out there. Just wanted to throw that out there. And before we get started, we say, sis?
I was just gonna say, just in case people think that, this just new information of, what needs to be done for the children in the community and Black people. We've been had actual, psychologists to give us this information. Family.
Absolutely. I mean, Dr. Amos Wilson has a whole book out, the developmental psychology of the Black child. Hold on, sis. See you.
Go ahead and yes, bring it out, Queen. Bring it out.
So are y'all gonna go through all of his material, or y'all think we're gonna stay with Dr. Amos Wilson a while after this book?
Oh, no, we're gonna hold on. Sister's right. Hold on 1 second. Gotta
will, as long as it falls in line of what we're reading. So as long as it falls in line of like the blueprint for Black Power, you know what I mean? Psychology, the development of the African child, as long as they fall into that realm, then yeah, we'll be reading those.
So like you said, sis,
line of what we're reading. So
Dr. Amos Wilson. I hear echo. That's
family. If anybody has their YouTube on, please mute it.
Yeah, I just did it. Sorry, family.
Okay, Queen.
Dr. Amos Wilson has the developmental psychology of the Black child.
Got to get that book.
He also has awakening the genius of Black children.
Falsification of African consciousness.
You have books by Janice Hale, Black Children. Right here, look at this. Black Children, their roots, culture, and learning styles. Excellent book to get. Look at this. This miseducation of the Black child. So these books have always been around.
That's right.
The racial conditioning of children. Right? Miseducation of the Negro.
Prodigy Wilson.
Decolonizing the African mind. Got Brother Tadika and Ife Kilimanjaro. Look at that. Education in school, science, culture, and African pedagogy, African K through 12. So as Sister Alima said, this stuff has always been out there. It's nothing new. You have people on the scene. You have people on the scene who are just regurgitating the works of other people. And I'm not saying that that's not a bad thing to keep their work alive. I'm not saying that that's not a good thing. But when you parrot work and you don't give these people credit, that's the problem that I have. When you pass someone else's ideas off as your own,
right?
That's what I have.
Exactly.
With some of these folks, in the community, So anyway, sis, we can go ahead and get started.
All right. Okay, let me get here. Chapter 15, Africa Agonistes. Dangerous economic straits of contemporary Africa. The benign neglect, which defines the economic policy of the national community toward the Black American community, also defines the economic policy of the white American European community toward the international African community. The scope of this volume will allow for only the sketchiest description of the economic position of continental Africa vis-a-vis the United States, Europe, and Asia. So basically in this chapter, family, what Baba is going to break down for us is the relationship, in essence, between Africa and foreign nations, and relate that towards the relationship of African Americans and Europeans here in America. Okay, on to 367, unless anyone wanted to read something specifically on 366.
No, sis, I have, that's it. I just had the first paragraph highlighted, and I have a note here. I thought about China. Mm-hmm. The last sentence in the paragraph, when he goes into, you know, did you just read that when he said if the African American and continental African, did you read that last sentence in the first paragraph? Okay, well, he says, you know, if the African American and continental African communities do not revolutionarily restructure and reprioritize their social political relations, identity and consciousness, values and goals, economic organizations and cultural wills to power, they shall quite likely perish or be trampled time and time again under the boots of domination of one ascending ethnocultural group after another. When I read that sentence, sis, I thought about China and how China is now going over to Africa and in development Africa.
That's right.
And I actually read an article maybe a week or two ago. I don't know if it was an article published by Brother Tawola or Brother Travis. I know one of them posted an article. It may have been Brother Impu. And the article was talking about how men, African men on the continent, are now complaining about Chinese men going over there and marrying African women and having babies with African women. So when I read this paragraph, I just thought about China. Like I thought about the Asians going over to Africa. And I said, daggone, Baba Amos Wilson wrote this book 22 years ago, and it's happening. You know, he's saying, look, if we don't get it together, we'll always be dominated by an ascending, he said, ethnocultural group. He said one after another.
That's right.
So first the Arabs, and now it's the Asians.
That's right.
So, you know, he was right and exact in his hypothesis that he made 22 years ago. So that's all I had, sis, for this particular page.
Okay, so impoverishment of Africa, IMF/World Bank, and U.S. policy. I just noted just a few things on this page in particular, and it was that said that 18 of the world's 20 poorest countries are in Africa, and 30 of the poorest 40 are in Africa. I think the statistics may be a little bit higher now, if I'm not mistaken, the last time I saw it. But it just shows you that as far as the most poorest countries in the world statistically, most of them are like Africa. I think now some of them are some of the Latin American countries. But I thought that was pretty interesting, which of course we already knew that anyway.
Right. But I love what I'm glad I just highlighted that, sis. I didn't even have it highlighted before. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
You said the status probably higher now.
Yeah, it's a little bit higher now. Added on to with some Latin American countries, add some of them on in there because, you know, a lot of them have imploded like the last 10, 20 years. Toward the bottom, some 1.5 to 2 decades ago, many African countries were ideologically committed to some form of socialism and sought to follow a socialist path to economic independence and prosperity. Today, these countries, along with the rest of the African countries, are committing themselves to some variant of capitalism. And as one official observer put it, all the talk is about floating currency, private enterprise, and getting hold of capital. And I thought, and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that's very true. You know, most societies nowadays are capitalistic societies, but African societies, from their inception, typically always were socialist societies.
Right.
On to page 368 at the top, the IMF and the World Bank are the purveyors of the new orthodoxy. They come in to bail out a country that is bankrupt. They do so by drawing up a structural adjustment program, a tight package of economic prescriptions designed to bring about free market enterprise and minimize governmental interference. Because the package is tied to millions of dollars in aid from Western donor countries, it is an offer that can't be refused. And so the IMF and the bank end up calling the shots on a broad range of issues, even political matters like calling multi-party elections that affect the lives of millions. And, that just further validates what everyone always said, the way that the IMF and the World Banks run. You know what I mean? They come in and they come in under the guise of giving out aid, which of course we know these aids are actual loans, but they come out in the guise of giving out aids, and, they basically come in and take over the country politically and economically and do what they want to, because now they're under their they're under their thumbs because they're taking this money from them. Right. And it's interesting too that the people who donate are the same countries who are responsible for impoverishing these countries.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing?
Yes, sis. I thought that, I remember Dr. Amos Wilson in a few of his lectures, he always say they create the problem and they come in with the solution.
Right.
So like you said, the same people who are responsible for impoverishing the place come in and say, we want to help you. We want to help to develop you.
And they make money twice that way, because we make money, we come in and pillage, we make money that way. Then we come in and offer you aid, which is mostly loans, and then we make money that way. So it's a win-win situation.
Right.
Absolutely.
But they hide themselves under the organizations they put in.
That's right, brother.
So it's just and destroy.
Facts. Okay, moving on. Typical International Monetary Fund, IMF, World Bank adjustment demands in the following ways. I wanted to read these. If maybe everyone can grab one off the list, the little bulleted list.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Currency devaluation to improve the balance of payments by raising the cost of imported goods and making imports more competitive.
Domestic demand management to cut back government budgets, especially for social expenditure and subsides.
Freeing of prices to remove the distortion the essentials from import taxes on luxury items, and to provide incentives where prices are set in the world market.
High interest rates and credit squeeze to reduce inflationary pressures.
Import liberalization to open local industry to competition from more industrially developed countries and encourage an expansion of foreign trade exchanges.
Privatization of state and parastatal enterprises to reduce government protection of inefficient economic activities. Each of these economic instruments has problems, some more than others. Currency devaluation increases prices for imported food and hits those who depend on it, mainly the urban poor, while increased prices of imported equipment raise production costs. Devaluation can lead to inflation but reduces imports of food in competition with local farm production. Devaluation increases commodity exports unless other producing countries do the same, as they are also under pressure from the World Bank to do.
Domestic demand management reduces public funds available for development for the local financial component of joint development projects and infrastructure improvements. Incentives through tax concessions for exports are not effective. The impact of freeing prices may be nullified if all countries follow suit and world prices are generally falling.
And a credit squeeze tend to result in bankruptcies, especially of small local businesses, and may push up costs all around.
Import liberalization increases dependence on foreign suppliers.
Privatization of state and parastatal enterprises may not distinguish between fledgling but strategically important enterprises, which add value to raw materials, and the merely inefficient. Local businesses, especially those in export markets, become prone to foreign takeover.
It's like the way that the IMF runs. It's like they literally come in so that they can set themselves up so that they can prosper.
Absolutely.
Yes. This is amazing.
Take over the profits. Take over
right.
the business. Exactly. Take over the resources.
Right.
Take control of the people.
Wow.
Right. That's what it really is. Yeah. It's not what we haven't caught on to a lot of the countries. It's not a system in which that they're trying to improve the economy of a country. It's a way in which to get you into type of loans and debts to undermine the country, to begin to exploit and control the resources. That's what the real game is.
That's right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's facts for real.
So that was beautifully said, Brother Travis. So the end game is to exploit the resources.
That's right.
The human and non-human resource.
That's what they're ready to do to Puerto Rico.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I didn't know some people were still without power over there.
Oh yeah,
crazy.
I thought that most of it would have been back, and then one of the representatives from Puerto Rico, I saw her on a YouTube talk show. Maybe it was Blog Talk, and they still have quite a few people without power. Wow.
Right.
It's devastating. This is crazy.
All right, family, moving on. So Kevin Watkins, who is the senior policy advisor for Oxfam, has come to the conclusion. He contends that instead of generating economic recovery in Africa, the programs have imposed unbearably costly social burdens on the poor of the continent, which is what the brother was just saying and what we just read. This outcome may be large in part due to the World Bank, as well as the IMF and other money-centered banks and agencies' imperial approaches to African development. Such approaches demean African people's ability to make crucial choices regarding solutions to their problems, since foreign agencies do not see them as the people perceive them. Of course, we know that, but they just see them as ways to make money.
Exactly.
Towards the bottom, money holes. The World Bank's policy is especially puzzling in view of its own analysis, which shows that only on 370 now, family, that only a fraction of the programs financed with the loans are deemed to be successful. The February 1992 report, Evaluation Results for 1990, assessed that 359 projects in all economic sectors at completion of World Bank funding, representing investments of some $43 billion. The report found that 36% of the projects had failed by the time their funding was completed, and only half of the remaining 64% surviving over time. In other words, the project projected a success rate of only 32%. In 1991, of course, they released another report, and overall it says that thus only 26% of the projects were deemed to be successful. So in 1993, the report pointed out that the lending to the World Bank's best customers in Asia is declining, while lending to Africa, the poorest performer overall, is increasing. And I thought that was interesting. So even though their model shows that their lending is not benefiting the country, they're still continuing to lend. So there has to be another alternative or another means.
Exactly.
For why they would continue. Why would you continue to keep giving someone money and it's not helping? It doesn't make sense. That's the whole point in giving aid. If it's not helping them, what the fuck are you still giving them money for?
Domination.
It's just because the end game isn't to really develop these countries.
That's right.
Control them and exploit them.
That's right.
That's about it. That's about it.
And they find different ways in order to exploit, not just in taking the natural resources, but finding ways to even take the children from the land. I just read something about the European Orphan Association, I believe it's called. It was a story of how they went to I think an East African country, told the story, created a story of to the mother of the child that they were sending the child abroad for education, but when it got to the European nation, they told the parents who bought the child for $15,000 in adoption that the mother abused the child in Africa. Wow. And the father was not around. So they created the story. But when the girl grew to age to speak English, she told the real story. And then the family that adopted her went on and brought charges against the organization, showing that they found ways to get money, almost like trafficking. So the story I just read yesterday morning, I'll try to send it in the link. And it's amazing. They'll find a way to exploit on the children, the land, and the natural resources. You know, big money.
I believe the overall agenda is that the Europeans, they might be under another name, but they're trying to reinstitute slavery.
I agree.
I
Yeah.
think that's the whole overall agenda.
This thing about Libya.
Overall agenda is to the reinstitution of slavery. It'll be under different names, like labor contracts and things like that. But the overall agenda is the
but it has already been revamped. It's economic slavery.
Yeah,
that's what a lot of countries are suffering from. They're suffering from economic slavery. Economically, they are slaves to the sanctions of other countries. They're slaves to relying on imports from other countries. You know what I mean? Just so they can eat. So slavery is definitely still amongst us. I would say it's that way. The whole essence in slavery was money and production. So they can get them both now without having to use the whips. It's perfect.
Hey, but if they control your money,
good point.
Where the money comes from, you can't do anything to liberate yourself. So in that sense, so they understand. Hey, I'm gonna get you physical. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you also in your pocket. So think about it. We'll be able to make some moves, but some of us can't afford to make the move.
That's right.
Yeah, it never left. It just transformed how it looked, and that way people are less, more likely to go along with it willingly, because then I recognize how it's exploiting them. You see that here, money on Christmas and them that is exploiting them.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move forward with benign neglect of African by world community. I didn't have anything highlighted in the beginning of this section. Does anyone have anything highlighted at the beginning?
I just had the first paragraph and in the bottom paragraph.
Okay, go ahead. Let's go ahead and read it.
Okay, the benign neglect and misguided policy of the international community toward Africa can be fairly typified by current U.S. relations with the continent. The February 1993 edition of the journal Foreign Affairs, titled America and the World 1993, features an article by Marguerite Michaels titled Retreat from Africa, which foresees very little hope for the economic future of Africa and describes how little Africa's future is of important concern to the so-called developed nations, especially the United States, Europe, America, right to the point. So in the last paragraph, basically to me, benign neglect is just a way of letting, like you see what happens in the ghetto here. The resources are all gone and the place becomes run down, then they come in and take over.
Right.
Like Detroit.
Yeah. You see it in Bedford-Stuyvesant, East New York, you see it, everywhere. They just let it, they take all the funding out of it, defund the schools, let it, become, just nothing. And then they come in with the theses of, building up the neighborhoods, but they're really moving.
That's right.
All the money comes in when they come. When we're there, there's no money. So the bottom paragraph I have, in the last 6 months, the State Department's Bureau of African Affairs has lost 70 posts, a 9% cut. Consulates in Kenya, Cameroon, and Nigeria are to be closed, and perhaps also the U.S. Embassy in the bodies and budgets are needed in Eastern Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States. Over the last 3 years, the Africa Desk for the U.S. Agency for International Development has lost 30 to 40 staffers out of 130 for the same reason. So basically, they're just understaffing everything, and then they're gonna, this probably already happened because this is like, might be a little outdated.
Right.
Also, Michael's voicing the conclusions of many other experts further contends that Africa is simply not commanding the kind of attention in the New World Order to keep it from dissolving into New World disorder. Whoa. Moreover, she rightly adduces that since global economy is the foreign policy king, there has been no foreign policy rationale for dealing with sub-Saharan Africa, especially since the continent began its free fall in the 1980s. Wow. Yeah. So then she goes on to, point out some things, about Africa's economic decline. In the last paragraph, between 1970 and 1985, Africa's already very inadequate share of the world's non-oil primary market fell from 7% to 4%. This statistic, in combination with others just as dire, the fact that Africa's economic growth rate at 1.5% is the world's lowest, indicates the devastation of the continent's prior fragile standard of living. Woo. Since the 1980s, Africa's national growth has relatively and its population has outgrown its economies. In 1965, sub-Saharan Africa's percentage share of world trade in manufactures was 0.4%. In 1986, it was 0.2%. This is in stark contrast to the percentage shares of the newly industrialized economies of East Asia, excluding Japan, whose growth increased that same period from 1.55% in 1965 to 8.5% in 1986. Wow. So, yeah, I mean, and this is these are countries that export gold and all kinds of resources. People come in and just take over, and I don't understand, the poverty there. I just, with all that wealth.
I mean, look at the time frames that it was happening. It happened 1970 to 1985. When did the opportunity for Africans come abroad and influx? It was around that time frame. You're talking about after the affirmative action.
Right. Well, that's when a lot of people started coming in once the affirmative action.
But a lot of Africans,
because then they could come in the country. Well, then they couldn't come in.
Their best was able to come.
Right.
So a lot of deals were made at that time as well with African countries on the continent, right?
That's true.
Ghana is only how old was Ghana? 50 years old, independent, 60 years old independently?
You got its independence in 1957.
Right? See what I'm saying? So now a lot of deals were made abroad that to say, hey, we'll allow your people to come here. You let us set foot here and take some of these resources. So the question comes in, not just that it was slow, like it was the African, like the country's fault. No, it was. I'm sure it was planned that way, based off of policy.
Right.
Now I gotta be honest with you, T. You what just came to mind when you said that, I'm over here thinking of how you're going to develop Africa. When you said it had to be a system, like something in place for this to happen. It didn't just happen. They didn't just become underdeveloped. It wasn't a fluke. And so, I can't help but to think about, what was the name of that book, y'all? I forgot the guy's name.
Dr. Walter Rodney?
Dr. Walter Rodney. That's what's on my mind. Mm-hmm. How Europe underdeveloped Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But what did China receive? What did Asia receive? They received reparations. They received money in order for them to build. Did Africa receive anything in order for these African nations to build? No.
Nope.
What happened?
Well, that's what benign neglect.
Right. They moved companies in to take the resources out of Africa. They didn't share it with the Africans. So all they gave you is an opportunity to get a job abroad.
Right.
During that time frame. That's what the point I'm trying to make. So one country got resources. We just got an opportunity to get jobs. I'm gonna let you come over during this time frame of 1970, 1985, while you move from 0.2% of growth, while the other country moves to 15%. And we asked the question, what happened? Policy was put into place so we can continue to be robbed,
Right. No doubt. No doubt. So keep on going, Sister Camille. I want you to read to the top of page 372, the nature of this difference.
372. I had highlighted where it says the countries south of the Sahara. Or you wanted me to finish the bottom of
I wanted you to finish the bottom. It was one more sentence. You said the nature of this difference may be illustrated by the case of Ghana.
Right. Okay. The nature of this difference may be of Ghana and South Korea, countries which in the 1960s both had exactly the same per capita income and GNP, US $230, with far fewer natural resources to begin with. South Korea is now 10 to 12 times more prosperous than Ghana. This goes on, what Brother Johnson was just talking about, as far as the Asians and the money
and surpassing, and actually
the resource.
Absolutely, and surpassing us, and surpassing Ghana, in gross national product. It says, and then he goes on to say that in the study of Africa, the New York Times concludes that in more general terms, if the most optimistic growth forecasts prove accurate for African countries to regain the per capita income level they reached in the mid 1970s. So he goes on to support, to provide details from that particular article to corroborate, and then on page 373, he says that the lack of American interest in investment in sub-Saharan Africa is echoed by other members of the international community. So, white supremacy, this thing is global. You know what I mean? This is not like a local thing. This thing is global. All right. So anyway, the lack of American interest in investing in sub-Saharan Africa is echoed by other members of the international community. Paul Kennedy in New York Review of Books observes that following the repeated rescheduling, never enthusiastic to begin with, virtually abandoned private loans to Africa. How similar to the behavior of white American banks towards the African American community. So we're looking at global racism, okay? He says that as a result of Africa's economy, Africa's economy is in far worse condition now than apart from a few countries in Cameroon, Congo, or Gabon, Kenya. It says Brown and Tiffin in 1992 in their study of foreign investment in Africa reached the conclusion. So I know that Dr. Umar, he was on the Breakfast Club and he kept on emphasizing that we were systematically locked out of wealth. Right. Locked out of wealth, and I think that Dr. Amos Wilson drove that point home in 1995. Prior to 1995, we first began writing this book in the early 90s, that we had been systematically locked out of wealth. So, I remember us, in the beginning of, when we first started the book club on page 34, there's this chart. Let me go here, and I distinctly remember the page. Page 34, Dr. Amos Wilson provides us with a chart to show how we were systematically locked out of wealth. Okay. Then in I think in chapter 11 or chapter 12, he talks about foreign investment and how the U.S. and other European nations do not provide African nations with a direct foreign investment. They don't make direct foreign investments in Africa, and how that's kind of like a method of systematically locking, them and us out of wealth. So that's what I thought about, how we are systematically locked out of wealth, locally, nationally, and internationally. When I read this paragraph. So anyway, he goes on to say that Paul Kennedy points out, although much international aid goes to the developing world, in fact, far more money flows out of the impoverished countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and into the richer economies of Europe, North America, and Japan, to the tune of $43 billion each year. Wow. This outward flow of interest-free payments, repatriated profits, capital flight, royalties, fees for patents and information services makes it difficult for poor countries to get on their feet, able to increase their industrial output. The result might be a large rise in the cost of technological dependence. So in sum, as we move into the next century, the developed economies appear to have all the trump cards in their hands: capital, technology, control of communications, surplus foodstuffs, powerful multinational companies. And if anything, their advantages are growing because technology is eroding the value of labor and materials, the chief assets of developing countries. So although nominally independent since decolonization, these countries are probably more dependent upon Europe and the US than they were a century ago. Wow.
That $43 billion is staggering.
Yeah, I think it's probably more than that now, Brother T.
Yeah, can you imagine? So you said, even if they had the resource, how would they be able to sustain themselves with all this money coming out on a yearly basis? And like you said, this is over 20 years ago, and it's 43 billion being drawn out of the continent and other
exactly. And remember, Brother T, I won't say doctor, but Professor James Small touched on that in the movie 1804 that Tariq and them came out with when they talked about the condition of Haiti. Right. And how, you know, Haiti is very impoverished because remember, they're paying restitution because of the Haitian Revolution.
Right.
And so, you know, they kind of touched on that in 1804.
That's right.
True.
Yeah, I want to know how, you know, you're trying to rid yourself of your oppressor and you end up owing them money.
Right.
Right. You're in the wrong for fighting back.
That's a killer to me. I'm like, man, that is some slick stuff. I mean, you know,
Sister Alima and I we had this conversation on the phone a few weeks back. You know, we were talking about Haiti. Remember, sis, we were talking about Haiti and we were talking about Ghana. And I was just so frustrated. I asked the same question, Sister Camille. I called her on the phone. I was on my way to my morning workout and I called and I said, sis. She's like, yes, doctor. And I said, look, you know, I'm just, you know, upset right now because I'm thinking, how the hell, you know, when you break free from your oppressors, you know, why do you owe them money? You know, how the hell does they have the power? You know, and so she broke it all down to me. And she was like, Doc, you know, when you lose and you get colonized, that's the nature of the beast. And I'm like, it's not fair. You know, I'm going off, it's not fair. So, you know, so she broke that down to me. And she also mentioned Ghana, what's going on in Ghana and why, is it Ghana? Sis, I keep saying Ghana, or Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe.
Yeah, the currency.
So brought up Zimbabwe and why Zimbabwe is so impoverished. And she was breaking down how, you know, I believe you said the British, sis, imposed a lot of sanctions.
Yes.
Yes, on Zimbabwe. And please check out her blog. When I say I read, like I perused it and I looked at like her bibliography and I want to sit down and really comb through it, please go to her website, Lili La Poete Speaks, and check out the blog that she wrote on the rise and fall of Mugabe. It's thorough. I looked at her. Like I said, before I read a book, I go and I look at the bibs. She killed it. And I want to go back and reread it because when she first put it up, I kind of perused through it. Then I looked at the bibliography and I was like, I got to go through and comb through it because I'm pretty sure Sister Alima touched on the fact that, you know, how they became an underdeveloped nation given the sanctions that were imposed on them. So please check out her blog, y'all. Please check out her blog. Very, very informative. And it ties into what we're discussing today.
Wow.
The development of African nations.
And their currency right now is their economy is the one that's down to zero now, correct? In Zimbabwe?
Yes.
Wow.
Also giving the white farmers back their land?
I saw that.
Oh, I'm like,
yes.
How is it? What?
It's a reason for that. And I'm telling you, go to her sister, check out Sister Alima's blog. Because I was confused too. I was like, well, why, you know, people was calling him an uncle and calling the guy a coon. And, you know, and so, you know, maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but it's a reason why they gave the farmers back the land. I don't want to ruin it. Just check out her blog, because I'm pretty sure she's going to.
Dr. Maat, could you please give out the link to Sister Lily's right now, so some of the viewers can have it?
Yes. We'll put it. Let's put it in. Can someone throw it in the chat? I'm not in the chat right now.
I'll throw it in.
Okay.
Yeah, throw it in the chat so they could check it out. Because it's thoroughly done, and I'm telling you, I'm pretty sure she touched on that. Mm-hmm. I don't want to ruin it. But let's move on to the next section. The self-inflicted wounds of Africans at home and abroad. Self-inflicted.
I like this chapter right here because you know this is the accountability section.
Right. It sure is.
It's crazy.
You know, we talk about that accountability.
This one is thorough right here.
Yeah. It's one of the brothers.
I got like all the pages highlighted.
Yeah, that's how mine look the same way.
I was like, look at
same here.
This is
same here. Let's get one of the brothers to start it off.
All right. Self-inflicted wounds of Africans at home and abroad. Chapter 1, comparative studies of the African American and continental African communities reveal that many political and economic ills they have in common. Both exhibit poor to near catastrophic prognosis for the future, with the next decade of the crisis being absolutely critical. A good deal of the blame for Africa's and Black America's economic and political maladies may be placed on shared history of slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism, and racism. However, a sufficient amount of the blame, and possibly the determining portion of the blame in our contemporary world, can be placed on the Africans themselves. Both.
Can you read that again? Can you read that again?
Abroad.
Brother, can you read that again? Yeah, can you read that again?
Page 374, family.
Bless you.
A good number of the wounds from which both suffer are self-inflicted. Okay, so however, a sufficient amount of the blame and possibly the determining portion of the blame in our contemporary world can be placed on the Africans themselves, both at home and abroad. And this is one reason why I wanted to stress the 1970 to 1985, because during that time frame, a lot of Africans left. Instead of coming back with something that was going to benefit their homeland, like learning agriculture, politics, resources, anything that would come back that they could build their economy and their government strong, I don't think many went back.
No, they didn't. They stayed.
In that sense. So the blame I see right here, when he say for those who stayed at home and the ones who went abroad, there was no plan of action I can't see.
Right.
I had a cousin who came from Liberia, who went to Cornell University and majored in agriculture. She went back to work in government. She was shut out. You know, now she's in New York working for the Metro Department. So it's to the point that I don't know if that was a plan of the government to send people abroad to come back to make the country better.
Right. Right. And then see, I can't help but to think about how I'm thinking about the baby boomers. Right. I'm thinking about my mother's generation and how they, you know, a lot of them came from humble beginnings. And, you know, when they made it to a certain financial level, right? When they made it to a certain, when they made it to a certain financial level, they, a lot of them left the city and they went into the suburbs. Now look at the city. Like my mother, my whole family's from West Baltimore. They moved from West Baltimore City to East Baltimore City. And when they got on their feet, they left.
Wow.
They left. They moved into the suburbs. They moved to Woodlawn. I grew up in Woodlawn, and I remember, you know, when in the early 80s, you know, most of my neighbors were white. When my brother was younger in the 70s, when he was in Woodlawn, you know, the school was predominantly white. And so when they got their education, got great jobs, they left the inner city and went into the suburbs and wanted to live around white folks. And now look at the inner city. So, you know, like you said, we have this habit of, you know, getting on our feet and not coming back, you know, to build up our communities. We get up and we get on our feet and
well said.
We roll up, we roll out.
I understand why that is, though. We have to, if we're going to speak on it, then we have to speak honestly. Yep. And if we're going to be honest, then a lot of times when you find yourself in a better position, you want better. And typically when you're surrounded by people who are content with where they are, or even if they're not content with where they are, just so happen to be in a position to where they don't like it, they're not in a place of elevation where you are. So then that kind of makes you stagnant in a way. So it's like, yeah, I want better for my family, but it's not just wanting better for my family. I want better for my community. I want to live in a better community. So it's like, in a sense, it's like, now that I have this degree and everything, what do I do to make my community better? Single-handedly. And there's nothing that I can do because I have to come from a community that actually wants better for themselves. And that's a whole nother issue in itself. Yeah. So I get it. It's a double-edged sword, but like, I get it. So until we actually come from communities that draw people to actually want to live in them, then that's always going to be that way.
Remember Addersley Park and Cambridge Heights and Laurelton? You lived in Laurelton, right?
You said what, sis?
You breaking up.
What you say, sis?
Sister Camille.
She was breaking up. I feel like she said something about Laurelton. I know I have family stayed out in Laurelton. I stayed out in something. Jamaica Boulevard.
So you still had like overly mobile Black community. Most of the people there were, you know, blue collar workers, and then you also had all the famous jazz musicians in Addersley Park, full of Black people that, you know, had some type of standards.
Exactly.
You know, that's what you need in the community.
Because, but that type of community.
And then you also, but what started to happen was, you know, as people, you know, began to come into some money, they were bringing their kids from the hood out there, and they was already jacked up. They was already 15, 16 years old. The next thing you know, you going to school with some kid that's trying to stick you up because they came from the, you know, the projects or whatever, where they was doing all kind of crazy stuff. Right. And so that kind of, you know, it never really got too out of hand, but there was a period where there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. They brought a lot of gangs out there from the Bronx, and, you know, it just got, I just think we have to call more of that out. You know, it should be a level of excellence, no matter whether you're rich or poor. You don't have to be excellent. You know, you don't have to have a lot of money to, you know, take care of your children.
That's it's the mindset. It's the mindset. It's the values. You know, that's what makes people want to be around or not be around. People don't want to be around ignorance. They don't want to be around negativity. They don't want to be around poverty. You don't want to be around that, especially when you're not in it anymore. But at the same time, somebody has to stick around to say, hey, you can make it there too. But that person who is still at the bottom has to want to get from out the bottom.
That's right.
We have a tendency to be in the bottom and get complacent with the bottom and say, fuck it, this is how it is for Black people. Like I was looking at a thread of some Zimbabweans talking, and it was some locals, and it was saying, well, some Zimbabweans just want too much. I mean, we're used to just having a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm like, look at your mindset. Like, you've been impoverished for so long that you have an impoverished mentality now. You're complacent with being poor. Like, you don't see nothing wrong with the fact that your government is filthy rich and you can't even barely buy a loaf of bread. That doesn't bother you.
Yeah, and they want you to be like, they want you to think like that too. They don't want you to. That's why, you know, the importation of you know, a lot of immigrants is at such a high level when you have such a high unemployment rate here too as well.
Exactly.
Because they don't want people that's going to be fighting for rights.
So like so my solution, I like this brother named Nature Boy. Anybody heard of him?
Oh yes.
Lord. Nature Boy.
He about to be in trouble too. He in trouble?
He moved to Belize. He said, "To hell with the whole system. Let me get some land and live off the land." I mean, his basic construct, I agree with. Get some land, but he's mixed up. He's a very mixed up young brother. Yeah, he is. He's very mixed up.
I mean,
he's abusive to women. But land,
exactly.
But land has concept of land and understanding it. You know that this system is all, even those ancestors who I admire them, Black Wall Street and other various institutions that we built here in the United States, that we have a long history of building stuff here, and then they make some kind of excuse to destroy what we build. I think that it's time to get somewhere where we can rebuild and not be under the hands of this European. I mean, here in America, I mean, we're always going to be somewhere where we're going to have to fight this European. No question about that. But
whatever you do or whatever you build, you're gonna have to be able to protect it.
That's right. You got to be able to protect it. So the question is that should we continue to struggle to rebuild this, or is it time for another migration? We did it from the South. We moved here. Is it time for another migration?
Nah, because we can't keep getting run around all over the place. We got, we got to stick it out, and they owe us some money.
Now she
needs to get that.
I think I'm with Sister Alima on the
repatriation. Y'all not about to get shit from the white people.
That's right.
Waste your goddamn time and waste your children's time and waste your children's time if you want to.
That's
but
right.
But white people not giving y'all a motherfucking cent. You hear me? Not 1 cent. I don't care how much Black Power shit y'all talk. I don't care how many dashikis you wear. I don't care how much you boycott. They're not giving you shit because we don't have any type of governmental system here to represent nothing. Yes. Just a bunch of big mouth Black people that just disorganized as fuck.
Yes.
Who the fuck represents African Americans here in America? Nobody. So until you at least establish that, at the very least, you can't even have that conversation. You can't even have that conversation.
Well, you got to start there. You start with the foundation. But when we repatriate, which I'm not against that, but we're going to be up against the same thing. We're going to be a whole other country, and they have their government there as well. And I've been to Africa several times. Like, again, I'm not against it, but even if we didn't set up something there, they still owe us some damn money over here.
He said,
I just feel like if y'all gonna stay, if people want to stay here, then just focus on building up the government. Don't focus on getting money that you're not gonna get. I think it's a waste of time and energy. If people want to stay here, then focus on what's important, which is building an economy for African Americans here in this country. Talking about some money that you ain't about to get is a waste of fucking time.
Building up the policies. Building up political aspect is definitely a must if you choose to stay here.
What'd you say, brother?
I said I believe building up the economy, building up a political stance. Like you said, if you're not going to do that, you're not going to get anything. I mean, we have to go back to see what worked, what didn't work, and we realized thus far we haven't received anything because we haven't done anything that worked. And everything that we learned in this literature here that Bobby Wilson put together, everyone had a power structure.
That's right.
But we did that. We did that through Reconstruction. We did do that. We organized. We got people in office. We built a governmental system, a sense of infrastructure. We tried to during Reconstruction. We bought land. We built cities and built businesses within those cities to be able to self-sustain ourselves.
Yes.
We did all of that.
We saw what worked, right?
But it was destroyed because it still come back to the system of white supremacy.
What didn't work. We didn't have the proper setup to protect.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that what we did in the past did not work. That's when we go back and realize what worked. Because we did have economic, we did have political stance. Now we have to work on the other components. As I said, in the literature that we have in front of us, he's showing us the components every other group used. Now we can put those pieces together. But until then, I agree with Sister Alima.
Yeah.
He stated we got to go. Unless we want to stay and get this stuff fixed.
And Sister Camille is right. Wherever you go, you're gonna have something set up. Wherever you go. She's right. So all I'm saying is before you can talk about what is owed to you, you gotta be set up first. You gotta be set up in a way to where they're gonna respect you and recognize you as a governmental body. Other than that, it's just a bunch of people talking.
Like, because we're so scattered in that regard, and we just have to go back and see and actually make it work. But We go to another country on a continent, we have to bring something to it.
That's right.
Especially resources.
That's right.
We have to bring something to it that's going to benefit not just us, but the people there.
That's
and
right.
something we can to spark out trade. It may be easier there because it may not cost as much there, but we don't know.
I think that it's too initially, and we discuss this all the time, me and a lot of the brothers. I think Africa is too far for most people. I think I think that we can start in the Caribbean. I think that'd be a start of colonizing some of us in the Caribbean. It seems to be that it's just too far for most people. I really think so, you know, and we go back and forth about, you know, where we should actually start. I think that we need to find where we can establish a colony. I do think the overall objective has to be Africa, because Africa has the resources in which we can sustain ourselves on. You know, if we can get the engineers and people who have skill, I think Africa is the choice, like Garvey believed, because of the raw material that can be manufactured. So wherever you go, I think that it still has to be the focus, Africa. But I think initially, to get people out of the United States, that we might have to look at somewhere in the Caribbean, or somewhere like Belize or somewhere like that. I think initially as a colony, and then begin to develop and get confidence of that we can do this thing, and then begin to migrate into Africa, I believe.
Thoughts?
So you're saying, Brother Travis, start small, basically, and you're saying it's probably too far. People don't want to take that 10-hour trip, 12-hour trip.
Initially.
So you're saying maybe start a colony somewhere or go to the Caribbean, which is closer, before we actually take that trip.
Right. There's no question we have to migrate and get in touch with Africa, because that's they have the resources where we can sustain ourselves and overall in the long term survive. Yeah, I still, Africa is the source for us. Garvey understood that. You know, that's why he wanted to get the early people who went back to Africa, was the skilled people, to begin to establish some type of manufacturing in Africa. There's no question it has to be Africa.
Now, I know we wouldn't have to wait for an invitation, but say for instance, I've heard stories of African nations on the continent stating that you can definitely come back home. You can come. We advise and we ask African Americans to come back home. Now, have anyone heard that same claim?
Yes, Rawlings brought that. Rawlings was the one who brought that out. That even land would be established. They wanted to skill people to come back to Africa and help rebuild Africa. Rawlings was the one who.
Has anyone seen how that looks?
Selassie gave land to the Rastafarians in Ethiopia.
So yeah, I'm saying
that's your money.
The point I'm trying to make is that how would that look, and what we need to do in order to make that happen? Like once we get to that land, how would it look so we can start being productive once we get there? You know, so I heard this invitation. I've never heard anyone act upon an invitation. So it made me feel like it wasn't true. So my thing is, when you look about going individually, yeah, it's probably easy. But if it's an open invitation such as that, it would be nice to hear African nations say, brothers and sisters, we're opening this land to you, so y'all can start building. We can start, you know, come back home. That would be a beautiful thing. It just has to be seen, so we can start moving in that direction, because it would be less talk. Could we have an actual nation saying that this is where we can start this at?
You know who did?
Well, there's been different African nations that I'll have to get my references, but there's definitely been different African presidents that have stated before that they would love for African Americans to come back home.
What would we need as a group to go?
Skills to harvest.
The skills and the funds.
Right. Resource, money.
Right, the money. That's right.
That's right.
I mean, it would be a beautiful thing to understand that, and then knowing that if we know people going in that direction, that's something that we can support.
Right.
That's something we can build upon, because we know, hey, I want to go back to Africa. This organization is going back to do exactly what we're learning right now.
Right.
I haven't seen many, but I do see a lot of individuals going back.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I posed the question.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't cost that much to move there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it doesn't cost anywhere as nearly as, you know, to live here.
Right.
So, you know, if
as you
person was
said,
able to save up a certain amount of money and have a business and, you know, acquire some land, you could build.
That could be a project. I mean, that if it doesn't exist, that we make it happen, because I understand where the hearts and minds are. If people are able to do it, they knew how much it would cost, where would they go, what would they do when they get there, what relationship they would build with the brothers and sisters that's already there, and how we can make up a 10, 15, 20-year plan so we know where our children's going. Then something we can act upon. But like I said, I don't know how it looks. I know, like, I have relatives in Liberia, and they say, hey, buy $1,500 worth of land. I don't know how it looks, you know. So it's like how we look for all of us to do something like that. So that would be something to look into, because if we
it's not going to be all. It's not going to be an all. It's going.
No, I mean all meaning whoever's going to go.
All that's interesting.
Right. There you go.
Whoever has the same mind.
There you go.
Well, let's move on, family, because y'all know how we do. We'll get to talk. Let's move on. Yeah, we got a little bit more to go. So
we stop right
here at there is no question. So while we were talking about different things that we as Africans do, and Baba was saying that we help contribute to our own demise, so to speak. He says there is no question that many, if not most, African leaders have squandered the admittedly few but crucial opportunities for positive change they have had and presently have. There is little excuse for the mismanagement of their economies and their debts by many African governments. As difficult and heavy as they may be. George Ayatley in 12992, he is a Ghanaian associate professor of economics in Washington, and he contends, according to Africa's elites, the causes of Africa's problems are forever external. Western colonization, imperialism, the effects of the slave trade, exploitation by multinational corporations, yada, yada, yada. But a new and angry generation of Africans reject the claptrap and lay greater emphasis on internal factors, misguided leadership, systematic corruption, economic mismanagement, senseless civil wars, tyranny, flagrant violations of human rights, and military vandalism. So disengagement by developed countries might have the positive effect of compelling Africans to begin a self-driven recovery, as well as ending the misuse of aid monies. Kennedy, Ibid. A similar argument could be made regarding the quality and direction of African-American leadership. For racial self-alienation and self-hatred deeply afflict both groups of leaders. These twin afflictions deny both sets of leaders and their followers the use of their greatest power instruments, a race-centered consciousness and identity, a sense of racial solidarity, and a commitment to race firstness. No race of people have triumphed without these vital motivational, mental, and behavioral orientations, for they are the keystones in the construction of liberated and prosperous peoples.
Ashe.
Hey.
Okay, so the U.S., Western Europe, and problem of African debt. Bala just basically goes on to talk about the debt in Africa. He goes on to talk about what has happened since the Cold War, basically how the U.S. has not been necessarily as interested. It's a lot more reiterations. I didn't really have anything in this little subsection. I had a little bit on 370.
I just want to drive home, sis, that he said its economic significance, talking about Africa, he said it continues to decline as Western demands for its raw materials are reduced as a result of the development of new technologies. So it's like, you know, the more technologies that the Western cultures develop, the less and less need they have for the raw materials in Africa. So I thought that was very interesting. That's all I had, sis, for that page as well.
Okay. All right, moving on to 376. So they go on to give us some different examples of how foreign aid has been forgiven from certain countries and how it's not yet to be forgiven for Asia. Excuse me, family, for Africa. And so right in the middle, they talk about Poland, how they forgave some of Poland's debt. They forgave some of Egypt's debt as well. But when it comes to African countries, they also forgave almost what they say 80% of the Latin American countries' debts. But when it comes to African countries, they're not going to forgive any of our debts whatsoever. They're going to make sure that they keep them at bay. Almost the end of the page. As Godwin further notes, Africa lags in its financial support from the U.S. essentially because it lacks the organized support of a strong political African American constituency. Africa's present growth rates are so relatively low and its debt so high until even its most successful countries would take approximately 20 years to be ranked among the world's lower middle income nations. Many of its schools and universities are bereft of adequate facilities, teachers, and teaching materials. Its civil services have been weakened, corroded, and corrupted by tyrannous or inept government administrations, and its infrastructure has fallen into disrepair or is grossly undeveloped. Its poor management of its human and material resources had meant economic and social repression, even in nations such as Nigeria, which in 1965 had a GNP higher than that of Indonesia. Yet today, Indonesia's GNP is 3 times higher and growing even more rapidly. 4 million or more of Africa's children die before age 5. A third are severely malnourished. 1 in 8 is severely disabled, and 1 in 3 receives no elementary school education. That was as of 1993. We know that those statistics are not necessarily as bad now because of different UNICEF and other things like that have come through and put in little programs and things. So it's not necessarily as bad, but it's still, compared to most nations, it's still extremely high. The planned suffering of Africa.
Yeah.
Planned suffering of Africa, of course, as we know, that we already know that to a certain extent, a lot as what's going on has been planned. The significance and validity of these charges are vastly inflated when we stop to consider the fact that all socially dysfunctional orientations, which now characterize much of collective African political behavior, occur within the context of and in reaction to European colonialism and neo-colonialism, as well as Western imperialism. The regrettable conditions of Africa can in no way be extracted from the even more regrettable and more reprehensible impositions and outcomes of European and American hegemonic capitalism. For the collective orientations of African nations and peoples today are inextricably intertwined with and reflective of the perverse intricacies of global white supremacy. Of course, we all knew that.
Right.
All knew that. That's all I had there, family.
Yeah, at the bottom I have this. I just said the famines, poverty, tribal war, governmental tyrannies, and kleptocracies, economic stagnation and distortion too prevalent in Africa today are the legacy of the 18th, 19th century European colonialism, and the ill effects of the 20th century American and European world capitalism. So basically, like you said, sis, a lot of it's being a little bit repetitive, but yeah, he's saying that neo-colonialism, the transatlantic slave trade, European imperialism, all of these sorts of things are, responsible for the current condition of Mama Africa.
Exactly. The Eurocentric distortion of African economies. It is of signal importance to recognize that it was not and is not African peoples and nations who were or are dependent on hegemonic economies of the West, but it was and is those economies which were and are dependent on the distorted economies of Africa and of African diaspora nations and communities. We must not forget that it was the profits of crops such as tobacco, cotton, cocoa, tea, coffee, and sugar that both the Europeans and white Americans generated the capital necessary for the industrial expansion of the 19th and 20th century Western Europe and North America. It was and is the cheap raw materials, the cheap food, low-wage labor, the consumer market for Western industrial goods, the foreign indebtedness, and militarized instability of African nations and peoples, which are the foundation of American and European political and economic ascendance. And in a nutshell, you know, that just summed up in a whole what we've been saying and what Bob has been reiterating the whole chapter, and what the world twice over already knows, that the reason that a lot of these countries are as rich as they are is because they have been pillaging for Africa for so long.
Yes.
Sucking the life out of Africa and sucking and putting life into their own countries.
Absolutely.
Because before they came along, I mean, we had thriving, wonderful, beautiful nations. And then once they came along, you know what I mean? Look what we have today.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't have anything in that little middle paragraph, the last paragraph. Today, third world elites and giant transnational corporations, also called multinationals, take the place of the colonizers, owning or controlling vast tracts of land on which the highly profitable export crops are grown, and the land from which the highly profitable export mineral wealth is extracted. And so the inequalities continue to grow. The result, as Dumont and Cohen stress, of the removal of control over production from those who work the land into the hand of those who merely speculate on the profit from it. These inequalities today divide the world into those who eat and those who hunger. And that made me think of Zimbabwe and the situation with the land and the farmers, and how, as Dr. Maat reiterated, was talking about earlier, about how their new president decided to give some of the land back. But people were quick to call him a coon, but I really wish people would stop using that term because it aggravates the shit out of me. But aside from that, it's not accurate when you use it. And if you understand the backstory, then you understand that the white farmers were the ones who were cultivating the land. They owned the land. They had relations with the bank in order to keep monies flowing, to keep the farms afloat. So that's why the people were eating. So once they put them out illegally from the land, no matter how that sounds in your head, you have to get it over the fact and realize that they've been colonized. So once you've been colonized, you can't keep talking about how it was in the good old days because it's not relevant anymore. I'm sorry, as cold as that may sound, it is not. So once you've been colonized and certain things happen and these people were owning the land, and you take these people land away illegally. So now who's going to cultivate the land? Who's going to now pick up these relationships with the banks? I mean, Mugabe can give the land back to the black people all he wants, but they don't have the relationship. They don't have the means. They don't have the money. So this is why the people remained poor, even though they technically had the land. It wasn't there. They didn't have the capital backing to run a bank and to get the proper loans. Unlike what people don't realize, it's expensive to run a farm. It takes a lot of money to grow food and to produce food. It's very expensive. And the bottom line is that the white farmers had the means and the black farmers did not.
So that's done on purpose, because if that's your country, you should be able to get funding to take care of that, because that's something that, you know, that where the country is able to sustain itself.
Well, if I'm a bank, I'm a privately owned entity. I don't have to loan anyone anything. It doesn't matter if I am in your country. So the way that it works is that in order for y'all to run this land and to have this land and run this farm, you need the money to run it. And my biggest issue was with Mugabe, because if you were going to try to be some type of boss and take the land and take the farms away from the people that were feeding the people, then why didn't you make sure the people had the means and the training and the backing and the money so that they can take up where the white farmers left off? You cannot kick off the people who are feeding the people and not put in a proper means to replace that immediately. That's only common sense.
Wasn't the major export back to the European countries, though, that which they farmed? Wasn't the major the country was still in poverty, and most of the food that was grown in Zimbabwe, that's what the biggest what caused the early civil war, was shipped back to the European countries. It was not feeding the African people. That's what caused the early uprisings of the Zimbabwe people, is that the money, the crops that was grown was shipped back to European countries.
That wasn't the issue. The issue was that they weren't getting all of the money that they felt that they should have been making from the goods and services that they were sending out. The people were always eating. That was never the issue. The people didn't stop eating until the farms were taken away.
So the solution would be is to recolonize, to go into recolonization and allow the Europeans to. I understand what you're saying about the food, because people got to eat. No question about what you said. I do understand what you're saying. So the proposal would be to redistribute the land back to the Europeans so the people can eat. And
the way that the thing is that the land is governed like anybody else's land is governed by the Constitution. So you have to follow that Constitution. And when Mugabe took his ass in there in 1980 and signed that Constitution and said, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, then that's what it is. You don't get to decide later on that, hey, I decide I don't want to do that. So now I'm just going to do me. Okay, so you want to do you? Well, guess what, buddy? Now you're going to pay these sanctions. So the means or the reasons for giving the land back is to lift the sanctions that they cannot afford to pay. This is what we don't understand. This is a double-edged sword here. It's a lose-lose situation. Either you don't eat and then you continue paying the sanctions and you still ain't eating, or you lift the damn sanctions and you let these people get their land back so you can eat. Either way, you're going to lose, but at least you're fucking eating. So unless you people have a better solution as opposed to him giving the land back, I'm all ears, and he's probably all ears as well. But no one has any solutions. Everyone just has criticisms. As far as I can see, that's the best solution right now.
Is to go back under colonization of the European.
Let's get this clear, okay? Because I don't think anyone understands this, which is why I really think I'm going to do this whole dissertation that Dr. Maat keeps trying to get me to understand, to try to get me to write. Once you go under colonization, you're never fucking from under it anymore. Like, understand that. You will never be completely liberated ever again. Maybe if you can, I don't know how. But once you are in a position that these people have taken over the land and they have made constitutions and all types of policies and all of that, they're not gonna make it so that you are completely in control ever again. Why would they do that? If I go through so much trouble to colonize you, I'm not going to just walk away. Mm-hmm. And that's not the reality. That's what we seem to think because we see Black representation in front of us. So to us, that says that we're no longer being colonized. But when you go and read these people's constitution and see who sits on the boards and who has delegated seats and who has delegated places in the houses and representatives, you see white people are still sitting their asses right the fuck there. And at any given time, if they want to come and shut some shit down, they can. Shut it down. And that's what it is.
And Dr. Amos Wilson touches on that, and we're getting ready to get to that, Sister Alima, when he says how they still, even though these African countries,
but they don't do that. Europeans don't do that.
Europeans still control. They still are in control.
Yes, I agree.
She's 100% correct.
Right, because again, we can go Europeans. This was British land, much of the United States, and they rebelled against the British European colonies over here in the United States. They did the same thing. They were under constitutions. I used to live in Savannah. I saw thousands upon thousands of land that was owned by the king, and they rebelled against British sovereignty and didn't want to pay taxes back to the British colonies, and they rebelled. Time after time, indigenous people here in the Detroit area, where Native Americans signed treaties with the Europeans, they rebelled against those and didn't honor those. Europeans are funny that way. Their paperwork, when it comes to them, in their particular constitutions, they want everybody to abide by them. But historically, if you look at their history, they rebel against their constitution.
Damn right they do. They do what they want to do. They do what they want to do.
But I see the logic in that. The people have to eat. I do see your logic. So
don't get me wrong, brother. I don't agree with it. Because when I say this, people look at me like I'm crazy. It's like, I don't agree with it. All I'm saying is until they can find a better solution, then that's going to have to be what it is. Because at the end of the day, they're still going to be under colonization, whether they get the damn land back or not.
Sure.
Yeah, they have to.
And at least they can lift some of those sanctions and maybe do something else with that money instead of paying sanctions for some land that in actuality Mugabe said he wasn't going to take in the first damn place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why he got hit with the sanctions. My thing was, if the land was a big issue, then y'all should have stayed up in there and in the working on the Lancaster House agreement until he decided, until they got to the point where they 100% were comfortable. If you were not 100% comfortable, you should not have signed it. Period. And that's what African governments do time and time again. Sign themselves over to something they don't agree to. Don't sign it. Stand your freaking ground.
Yeah.
Right. Stand on your square.
Right.
Yep.
Stand on it.
Hit up.
But at the end of the day, they end up signing it away because there's incentives in it for them, and it's power and money.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, y'all. So on page 379, I actually have the entire paragraph highlighted, but I'm not going to read it. I just want to say that Dr. Amos Wilson is stating on this page that one way to keep African nations impoverished, one technique that Western nations utilize to keep African nations impoverished is that they make them pay more for imports, and the African nations get paid less for their exports. So that's a way that they keep them impoverished. This inequality that he keeps talking about with regards to imports and exports. So they pay more for imports and they get paid less for exports. And this inequality, this imbalance is what keeps them, is a technique to keep them impoverished. So he talks about that on page 379. If you guys want to read it, we can, but that's what I got out of it. Sister Lima?
Yeah, I'm still here, sis.
Is there anything else you wanted to touch on page 379?
No, I'm good. We can go to 380.
Okay, cool. So
I didn't even have nothing on 380 either, really.
Yeah, I didn't have anything. I didn't have anything. I have it highlight. I have a few things highlighted, but he's basically saying that, that the African nations have become dependent on Western food distribution, which you stated earlier, Sister Alima. And so Dr. Amos Wilson is saying that they can use food as a weapon, right? They can use food to maintain its domination of Africa because they rely on, their food being imported, okay? And at the bottom of 380, Dr. Amos Wilson says that the United States and its European allies have rigged the rules of trade and commerce such that they will win all bets. So this is just basically reinforcing that we are purposely and systematically locked out of wealth. Okay, he said, look, they rigged all the rules. He said these rules are designed to exclude by the manipulation of tariffs and quotas the manufactured goods of Africa, and consequently help to maintain its dependence on primary products for the large majority of its exports. In some, the European engineered monocultures of Africa make them highly vulnerable to the not unplanned steady decline of commodity prices. That is, the economic dependency of many African countries on the selling of one or just a few commodities to the industrialized nations make them vulnerable to the prices those nations decide to pay for such commodities. And those prices are often engineered in favor of these buyer nations and not by market forces. So we are often told, therefore, the much ballyhooed balance of payment deficits of African nations are often engineered by the West, which, while raising the prices of its exports to Africa, simultaneously lowers the prices it pays for African exports. So that's what I had for that particular section. Then he goes on the charade of Western aid. So, like Sister Amos said, Dr. Amos Wilson, he's very repetitive because I think he want to drive home these things. And earlier, Sister Alima talked about foreign aid and how foreign aid really isn't aid. So I think we use the word aid. What's the word I'm looking for, Sister Alima? It's used, I don't want to
exploitation.
Yeah, it's really exploitation. It's not really foreign aid. Even though he's calling it aid, it's not aid.
Right.
It's not
help.
It's not help at all.
What do they call that Clinton Association that happened in Haiti? At $30 million that they took from Haiti. What was it? What was that called?
I didn't hear the question, brother.
And Haiti, when they did Haiti, I think they stressed it that how much did the Clinton Association take from Haiti?
Oh yes, it was millions of dollars. I forgot. It was millions.
Was it?
It was
in the form of
millions.
aid, or was it form of a foundation?
It was in the form of some type of foundation.
It was a form of a foundation. You're right.
Okay.
Yeah, and they said it never reached them. The people over here, they never got it. Never got the money.
Wow. This is after the hurricane in 2010, correct?
Right.
And we're running around calling Bill Clinton the first black president, following behind.
Get the fuck out of here.
Bill Clinton stole money from African folks, locked up black African men, you know, and we're running around calling him the first black president because he know how to play the damn saxophone. So anyway,
Let me tell you.
play the saxophone, end up getting caught, getting some head from him.
So what people love about it, the Clintons, they did.
They love him. They love him. They love Bill.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, family, finance, export trade.
Yeah.
The continuing reign of colonialism. Y'all, what page? 381, 382?
Yeah, we can move to 382.
We can go to 382.
Yeah, the continuing reign of colonialism. The degree to which many African regimes and countries can be held fully responsible for their adverse political and economic conditions is quite unclear when we recognize the fact that these nations, though nominally independent, continue to be under the control of their former European colonial metropoles. The economies of many African countries, whether bankrupted or not, have yet to be owned by the indigenous Africans themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. The former colonial powers have hardly ceded political. Yeah, that's basically what Sister Lily was saying. You know, they you know, got their asses sitting up there pulling the strings.
That's right, Clean. Exactly.
They got a black face. You know, they use a sock puppet, a black sock puppet, and you know, they're still pulling the scenes. You know, pulling the strings behind the scenes. Woo! This is crazy.
Yeah. Go ahead, sis. Read the last two sentences. The former colonial.
The former colonial hardly ceded political and economic self-debt. Formerly wholly owned and operated. A prime example of the Eurocentric neo-colonial control of African economies is provided by France's control of its former African colonies.
So then
Paris still. Go ahead.
So yeah, I was just going to say this. So I mean, we could just summarize the other page. He's just going into France and you know, in Paris, and how the French still controls, you know, places like, I believe he says, the Ivory Coast and Senegal, and he's saying they still have a hand in what those people are doing. You know, he's saying even though they may say, look, you know, we really want to encourage them to open up their economies to other people. Dr. Amos Wilson is saying that's not the case. You know, anytime people try to go in there, you know, he said with regards to what medicine, telecommunications gear, oil, he said that the French say, they want to monopolize things. The French still want to monopolize the economy in these in this post I guess independent era, right? So they're saying that, hey, look, we still want to have some control over these economies in their previously owned countries.
Right.
Yeah, so he's talking about that on page 83 and page 84. But I just wanted to read this paragraph on page 82, right above what Sister Camille just read.
In the alternatives, right?
In the alternatives, I want to drive this point home. Dr. Amos Wilson says people will escape from hunger only when policies are pursued that allow them to grow food and eat the food they grow. African people will escape from their other than material hungers, the hunger for economic and technological growth and development, for stable governments and societies, and for an enriched quality of life, when they can enter into trade relations which are mutually beneficial to themselves and their trading partners. So right now, they're engaged in trade relations that just benefit the European or the Western nations, right? So he said only until we enter into trade relations that are mutually beneficial, you know, that's when we will quench our hunger for, you know, economic and technological growth. He says when they trade and technologically cooperate within their own nations and regions, with other African peoples and nations overseas and with non-African nations in ways which will permit them to produce for themselves and to cultivate interdependent self-reliance. All right. So that is the alternative. So do you want to go into the monoculture, sis, page 385?
Okay. The African American monoculture.
Yes.
Black America's cash crop. So I started with increase here in the middle. Increased African American political power is necessary for it to effectively safeguard and advance the interests of Blacks at home and abroad. For if American and European trade, economic, and political policies, which now impoverish and disempower Africa and African peoples everywhere, are to be reversed, then it is the African American community which is best positioned to lead such a reversal. The African American community is the chief bulwark against a total American European usurpation of the freedom and vitality of African peoples the world over. However, the African American community cannot successfully undertake such an awesome responsibility unless it realistically recognizes its own socio-political and politico-economic plight. This community must resolve its own dependent relationship with white America. It must, with extraordinary haste, learn to do for self. It must resolve its own economic monoculture relationship with white America. Like many diaspora and African nations and communities, Black America exports only one cash crop or commodity, and that commodity is labor. And like many dependent African nations and communities, its sole export commodity is devalued by white America. More ominously, not only for its labor commodity being steadily discounted by white America, it is increasingly no longer being bought at any price. While white America claims that its devaluation of Black American labor is market-driven, in that such labor is relatively unskilled, outdated, untrained, unreliable, inferior, and the like, it has demonstrated its bad faith and hypocrisy by the fact that it has by all means refused to invest in the upgrading of Black labor by institutionally providing the means by which it may be upgraded. In fact, white America has disinvested the upgrading of Black labor by its almost wholesale withdrawal of funds used for the education, training, reskilling, and employment of Black labor. In the meanwhile, it keeps raising its prices for the goods and services it exports to the Black community. Foreign aid is essentially designed to subsidize white-owned firms and professionals, in that the largest bulk of these funds, which are used to finance such initiatives, are ultimately spent with these parties. Little, if any, of the money is spent with or remains in the hands of its reputed Black recipients. Consequently, the basic economic and social formation of the recipient Black community is not fundamentally changed, and matters are often made worse. Alternative. The alternative to this problematic system is to engage in increased internal production and trade, and in lateral trade with partners across the African diaspora, as well as friendly non-African nations and communities. African nations trade far more with European nations, America, and non-African nations than they do amongst themselves. This trade orientation we refer to as vertical trade. Trade between African nations and communities is horizontal or lateral trade. The major trade imbalance relative to African nations on the continent and across the diaspora is not so much the one that inheres between these countries and the industrialized countries of Europe, America, and Asia, but the imbalance between vertical trade and horizontal trade. Because the volume and volume of trade between African nations and regions is relatively low compared to their trade with Europe and the US, they are far less able to resist trade pressures and the manipulation of prices for their commodities by these industrial giants. A parallel situation defines African American white American trade relations. The virtual absence of horizontal trade within the African American nation also leaves it less able to resist economic and political manipulation by white America. So once again, he's showing us how the relation between white America and African Americans and the exploitation of the international community on America. And I thought it was interesting. He once again let us know that horizontal trade, which is trading within our own communities, that it's important. And that if we don't do that, then like he said, it makes us less able to be able to resist economic manipulation from others.
Absolutely. Right. I just wanted to add, and you wrote a beautiful blog on this. I got a notification from you the other day. You wrote a blog on net neutrality. And, that was the first time I heard of it. I said, wow, I must be out of the loop, because I was going around telling my family, and they was like, girl, you didn't hear about this? Congress has been talking about this. But I got notified. I read your blog, I think it was a few days ago, on net neutrality. And I was just sitting here thinking, like, after I read your blog, that's when I started, how you read something or something is brought to your attention, and then you start noticing it more. People are like worried about it. And I put up a post on Facebook, I think it was the day before yesterday, and I was saying, I asked a question. I said, well, what have you established, while you had free access to everyone and everything?
That's right.
The internet permitted us to establish trade relationships with our brothers and sisters in the diaspora and our brothers and sisters on the continent.
That's right.
But what we use this with the internet?
Facebook.
We post pictures. We get on Facebook, talk shit about each other. We troll YouTube videos. We circulate slander. We put up pictures of our food, our kids. I'm just sitting here thinking now folks are worried about, net neutrality and having to pay to access certain platforms. But we should have been using these platforms, sis, to develop relationships with our brothers and sisters on the continent and in the diaspora. And the internet is the tool that would have permitted us to do so.
You understand that?
And we abused it.
You
totally abused it.
You made a wonderful point, and I'm definitely gonna read that blog as well. But they don't. The dominant society does not worry about us when we had that ability to use the internet for trade. Because they realized they had enough distractions to keep us away from it. Now net neutrality start coming into play when you realize I can destroy your economic structure. You understand? This net neutrality is a problem now, because now you can create your own bank. And now you can send funds to any country, and you don't have to include them.
Right.
So it don't become a problem when you share ideas. That's what we're doing on a social set. Until somebody wised up and created this ability earlier, then you would have heard of net neutrality earlier as well, and it wouldn't have been the Obama saying, "Hey, let's put this act into place." Now they trying to stop the blockchain. They stopping the ability to create and send funds, and people using economic version of it. So I definitely want to read the blog so I can get understanding as well. But I do recognize that, hey, they wasn't worried before, but I think they worried about putting a stop to things now.
Well, yeah, they want to control the information that you're able to put out. They want to be able to just like have people watch TV and reality shows and not really get any type of real information. You can learn to do so many things on YouTube, and without having to pay for school, or you can really enrich yourself. And so they don't want alternative information to reach people. No matter how many it is, you know what I'm saying?
Oh my God!
And
what?
Sister Alima making me laugh. Over there cracking up, probably laughing.
Take them off your face.
What happened, sis?
Huh?
Oh, so she put it on mute. But anyway, let's move on, because we getting down.
Keep going. We should be talking too much.
We got like 7 minutes. We've been going in. Got like 7 minutes to go, and literally got like 9 pages to discuss. So anyway, the next section is called Open Markets, Open Shelves, Most Favored Nations in the Manufacturing of Wealth. What the gist of this particular section or subsection, Markets and Economic Growth, is, he's just basically saying that it's not enough to simply produce. So just to say that I have a product, that's just not enough. Dr. Amos Wilson said it's not enough to produce. There must exist a market where what is produced can be bartered, swapped, trade, or sold. All right. So there needs to be a market. All right. And I just want to add that the market cannot be saturated, right? You got a lot of markets already saturated. But anyway, so he said it's not enough just to produce. but you have to have a market. And I'm going to add to that the market can't be saturated either. So he said the major incentive for the manufacturing of products and the reaping of profit from their sale is the existence of an active market wherein those manufactured products can be sold at a profit. However, the mere existence of relevant markets wherein certain manufactured products may be sold in no way guarantees that they will be sold therein, even if the demand for them is high. So he's saying that, wait a minute, you know, it is no guarantee that even if there's a market that your product will be sold. Why? Because he said this may be the case because those in control of the market where the manufacturer will want to sell his product may, for any number of reasons, close that market to him, right? And some, just as not all markets are free, not all markets are open. It is not enough to manufacture a product for sale. In order to sell it, it must be accessible to a market of buyers. If extant markets where a manufactured product can be sold remain closed to its entry by those who control them, then the manufacturing of that product will cease since it cannot be sold. If the same applies to a broad range of products, then the broad range of manufacturers who produce them will go out of business and cease to exist, or will not come into existence in the first place. And if these manufacturers or potential manufacturers whose products have little or no less to profitable market outlets happen to reside in certain countries or localities, those countries or localities will exhibit relatively low levels of product diversity, export of manufactured goods, income from the sale of manufactured products, technology and technological organization and advancement, income per capita, unless the sales of raw or primary commodities brings very high income relative to population size, employment and wages, and their general quality of life. All right. So Dr. Amos Wilson said, look, it's not just enough to produce, you know, a market has to exist, and then you have to have access to the market. Mm-hmm. All right. So there needs to be a market and you need to have access to the market. And he's saying that, you know, people say that these markets are free and open, but he said in actuality, these markets are closed. They're controlled and they're closed. So on 388, he says, despite the European and American cultural and political advocacy of free markets, open markets, of letting the market determine the distribution of goods and services, in theory and practice, they operate in terms of protected trade, protected markets, and managed trade. That is, their trade relations with other nations are managed with the objective of maintaining their economic domination and preponderance in protecting important segments of their internal economies and markets, both internal and external, from the threat of foreign competition. He goes on to say on page 388, he talks about race-based trade relations, and he's saying, look, a lot of these trade relations are in economic, foreign policies are based on white supremacist and white racist motives, attitudes, biases, stereotypes, and intentions. All right. He said that they are meant to create and maintain a self-serving internal and international division of labor based on skin color. He says, with the darker and black skinned nations and communities functioning as low-wage laborers, producers of raw and primary commodities and materials, and functioning as poverty-stricken servants to independence on the relatively more prosperous white, yellow, and brown nations and communities of the world. And this is so true. Like, take a look at every continent. When we look at every continent in the world, you see the darker skinned people at the bottom. They're at the bottom. It doesn't matter where you go. Darker skinned folks are at the bottom. All right. So that's what I thought about when I looked around. I was thinking about in the Caribbean. I'm thinking about in Europe. I'm thinking about in Africa. I'm thinking about over in Asia. You have the darker and black skinned communities. These folks are typically at the bottom of the social hierarchy, or at the bottom of the social order.
Dr. Maat.
Yes, sir.
Do you think that issue is going to happen with the insurgence of the Chinese impregnating the African woman in Ghana? Do you think a new class will come out of that?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Like, I think a new class will come out of that.
Well, plus they want access to the you know, I think it's like you have to have a tribal lineage.
But yeah, but no different. No different when the European men were, you know, raping African women, and you had the mulatto class, right?
Right.
Well, the emergence of the mulatto class. I think the same thing is going to happen, Brother Travis.
Me too.
Yeah,
right. I think they send them to their schools and educate them, and they come back all screwed up in the head.
Absolutely. So then he goes on to say this race-based, color-based, national and international division of labor is structured and maintained by trade policies which embargo African manufactured products for any number of reasons, including placing high taxes or tariffs on their entry and sale within the American and European markets. The placing of economically disadvantageous restrictive quotas on the quantity of these products embedded into those markets. So they're taxing them, okay, just to even bring your product in, you know, to the country, you have to pay high taxes, all right? So it says Western European and American economic foreign policy includes the restriction of foreign aid, technological aid, loans, and other international developmental programs in ways which provide little or no finance to African nations to aid them in the creation and development of significantly productive manufacturing and technological institutions. Moreover, Western European nations in America, in creating and maintaining the heavy indebtedness of African nations, leave them with little or no money to invest in the development of their manufacturing and technological sectors, as well as to invest in their general economic growth and development. Furthermore, the European American manipulation of African tastes. This is very important to me. Furthermore, the European American manipulation of African tastes, appetites for Euro-American manufactured and exported products in order to increase their consumption by Africans through mass media, advertising, and cultural imperialism through the European American control and ownership of African commercial markets, structure the spending habits of Africans in ways that undermine their ability to save and their ability to accumulate wealth in the quantities and ways which permit them to finance their own economic development, produce their own consumption, and to create or manufacture a broad variety of products for sale in the international market. I almost thought about a lecture Dr. Amos Wilson gave, and he mentioned Elijah Muhammad. And he said, you know, one thing Elijah Muhammad did do was change the taste. You know, when he said the white man is the devil, you know, he was saying that, you know, Elijah Muhammad changed the taste of Black folks. You get what I'm saying? It was just like, you know, that was a way of changing the taste of Black folks. Because as you can see, whatever we taste, whatever we yearn for, you know, you can capitalize off of what people value, what people, you know, the appetites that people have for certain goods. And so, you know, he was saying that one thing Elijah Muhammad did when he was saying that the white man is the devil, he was saying that Elijah Muhammad successfully changed the taste that Black Americans had, you know, that European taste that we had. He said that, you know, he eliminated that.
It wasn't hard either, because look at all the resources and data that he had to corroborate his story.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, people being lynched, murdered daily, the police brutality at that particular time. It wasn't hard to prove to Black people that the white man was the devil.
Poverty.
Yeah, poverty. Absolutely, sister.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of difficult because they see the Beyoncés and the Jay-Z's and the Dr. Dre's. At that particular time when Elijah Muhammad was coming up, Jim Crow was still very strong.
Right.
And, now it's a lot more difficult, you know.
Right. So then he goes on to talk about the lack of access to internal markets.
Well, they don't understand the systems. Right.
What you say, Brother T?
No, it wasn't me.
Okay.
Sister Camille said something about systems.
What did you say, sis?
Oh, I was just saying that they don't understand systems. They don't understand how it actually works now. You know, it's
true, very true.
It's covert instead of outward approach.
Sister Alima.
Huh?
Do you want us to read this last paragraph, the lack of access to internal markets, and then call it a night, or do you want to comb through all the way through for the next 7 pages?
Yeah, I don't really see the point of taking 7 pages to the next week.
Let's roll.
I mean, just don't read the entire page. Just, you know what I mean? Just sum them up real quick. Let's go.
All right, let's roll. Let's start with lack of access to internal markets.
What's that?
Okay, lack of access to internal markets. Not only are African manufactured products denied access to internal markets, they are denied access to internal markets. This situation is due to the fact that there exist few African-owned manufacturing facilities of sufficient size, productivity, efficiency, and marketing clout which can penetrate Africa's own national continental markets. The existence of these non-African-owned facilities militate effectively against the development of an indigenously owned manufacturing and marketing establishment, which can effectively compete against non-indigenously owned industries and marketing prowess in Africa's internal markets. Those main customers are Africans themselves. Hence, struggling, near impoverished, African vendors are forced out of the street by their non-African shopkeeping rivals to sell in the open air and the side markets, where they must hawk their goods to customers who have already spent the bulk of their income with non-African merchants. So it's just talking about how Africans struggle even on their own land to be able to sell because the market is so monopolized by foreigners. On to page 390. I didn't have too much on 390, just here at the end, family, just basically giving different examples. It's talking about trade and exports, different percentages of that nature. Go down to the bottom paragraph. In fact, external factors influencing Africa's economic development are at least as important and indeed constitute almost insuperable obstacles. It has been exceedingly difficult for Africa to break out of the primary commodity straitjacket inherited from its colonial past and to end its reliance on TNCs, transnational corporations, both processors and traders whose objectives may not and cannot be expected to prioritize Africa's economic and social developments. Page 391. Top paragraph towards the end. Finally, the most serious of all, there is growing crisis for Africa as direct foreign investment bypasses Africa and the collapse in primary commodity prices and export earnings makes the already crippling foreign debt ever harder to surface. So Baba was just saying that the debt, foreign investment in Africa, that it bypasses all of the commodity prices and everything that they need. So basically, foreigners are investing in Africa, but they're totally ignoring what they need. They're not trying to work with them as far as exports and imports are concerned, but they're constantly investing for their own personal gain. The parallel case of white American, black American national trade relations and accords towards the middle of the page. As a matter of fact, as in the case of Africa in general, there does not exist in the African American nation enough non-black owned manufacturing facilities to employ, even at low wages, a truly significant number of its inhabitants. Also, as is the case of Africa, non-African Americans own and control both the external and internal markets where African Americans buy and attempt to sell. And of course, we already know that we don't control the market. Typically, the market is controlled by outside entities. Family. Last paragraph towards the end. Consequently, even when African American manufacturing and marketing entrepreneurs establish and develop the relevant manufacturing and marketing facilities, their products and services are denied unencumbered access to both external general American markets and to the internal specific African American market. And that's all I had there. Now on to 392, unless anyone wanted to add something.
Not at all, sis.
Okay, 392, second paragraph. The refusal of white-owned financial institutions to provide funding for the development of black-owned manufacturing and marketing facilities, even when the monies they would release are composed of the banking and financial deposits of and earned income from black consumers, transparently represents a racist scheme on the part of white Americans to keep black Americans out of competition with themselves. Which, of course, we were privy to this information as well because of just life and what we've seen, and because Baba has reiterated it several times. Towards the end here, family, last paragraph, towards the end of the paragraph. The key reason for this situation is because truly significant African American and African economic autonomy and power is compatible with continuing white economic domination and exploitation of African peoples and with national and international white supremacy. Consequently, even when white America appears to be consciously supporting the full economic development and power of Black America, when it appears to be seriously inclined to bring Black America into full socioeconomic equality with itself, its compulsive need to still dominate, exploit, and control Black America, a need which possesses its collective unconsciousness, will undercut and vitiate its good intentions. This means that the political, social, and economic liberation of Blacks from white liberation cannot depend on the apparent goodwill and intention of whites. African people must cleverly utilize and manipulate whatever resources they can wrangle from whites, for many of those resources originate from the soils, labor, consumption, and exploitation of African peoples themselves to their advantage. So like Baba is saying, don't get confused because the white people seem to be wanting to help you, and they seem like they're giving us aid and they're bringing us food and water, and it's always to their own benefit and to our detriment. And history has proven that time and time again.
Very true.
Reasons for optimism. Africa's destiny is far from hopeless. Generalizations about this huge continent are just that, generalizations. Examples of economic growth, political stability, social and technological development are present and increasing in some African nations. It must be kept in mind that Africa is the world's second largest continent, consisting of 53 countries, which encompass a broad array and assortment of social systems, human and material resources, and culture. A number of these nations are not only characterized by political and financial stability, but also present great promise and opportunity for intrepid investors. In fact, as an example, in Botswana, they talk about how Botswana used to be really poor in '67, and then they had a great economic increase between 71 and 87 and increased 13.8% per year. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, Botswana is still actually one of the better off African countries to this day. Page 394.
About the sugar export, right?
You said what, brother?
That was about the sugar export and stuff.
Yes.
Gotcha.
The responsibility of the African American community for Africa's economic development. The ignoring of Africa by the Western nations provides windows of opportunity open to Native Africans to drastically reduce the massive outflow or flight of capital, which has been estimated to exceed 80% of the gross domestic product, and to reinvest in their own countries. African peoples and nations across the diaspora must apprise themselves of a full ongoing knowledge of the social, economic, and cultural history of African nations, as well as their contemporary status, and reorganize their social, culture, and economic structures so as to initiate and fuel continental Africa's growth and development. So like Baba is saying, of course we know that they've been ignoring Africa, but we can't ignore Africa too. And in order for Africa to build itself up, like Baba said, it needs to invest in their social and economic and cultural history. They need to, especially African nations, number one, need to work together. I think that's one of the biggest, that will always be one of their biggest downfalls, is that they don't turn to one another and they turn to foreign aid to help them.
Sister Lily, did you peep on 394 when they say there's in Zimbabwe and the last the second chapter of 394, countries like Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Ghana are doing all the right things to get their economies back on track?
Right, and see, that was in the 90s, and at that time, this particular period in the 90s, Zimbabwe was doing well. So they had a period where they had a brief period of economic growth, but it just didn't last. It didn't last at all.
Wow.
Just a few years. Okay, the African American community must no longer be afraid to be constructively critical of tyrannous, repressive, corrupt, and inept governments in Africa and across the diaspora. Such regimes are a threat to vitality and survivability of the whole Pan-African community. I've noticed that we have a tendency to not want to criticize certain African governments just because they look like us. But if the government is shitty, the government is shitty. I don't care who they look like. So we have to be able to be realistic and be of concern of the people. And how are the people living? It's not about the government. Who cares about the government? Are the people surviving? If the people are not surviving and thriving, then the government needs to be changed.
Exactly. And you know, I'm trying to find this a communal group. Say, I don't like to use tribe. That Africans, historians say we shouldn't use that, but it's a communal group in Africa. I'm looking for them right now. It seems like anytime the black and white dynamic come into existence, that it's always an undermining of our way of living, and we end up you know, destabilized. They had discovered a communal African communal group within Africa, have never been colonized, never came in contact with European government, and they live off the land and they function, you know, quite well. But it seems like when we come in contact with these people, it always destabilizes our way of living. That's what I was just looking at. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so 395. It's pretty much more reiterations here. Baba continues to tell us what we need to do in order to obtain some type of economic growth. And most of it, as he keeps stating, is that we need a Pan-African community. We need a community where African Americans and Africans still on the continent work together and work to form some type of trade system within ourselves. Page 396, family. I will start here at the last paragraph. Go ahead and close it out. In order to help create a favorable investment climate in African diaspora nations and communities, the African American community must create its own stable and productive investment infrastructure. Moreover, it must appropriately organize its political economy and political system so that it may influentially interact with diaspora nations and communities. The major political objective of these national initiatives on the part of the African American community is the political stability of diasporan communities, without which social and economic health both at home and abroad is impossible. The economic objective of these initiatives include the creation and expansion of productive capital markets, i.e. stock and bond markets, domestic banks that can lend and invest in their local economies, trading companies, alliances, joint ventures, subcontractors, and the elimination or a significant reduction of barriers to, as well as the construction of channels for, the confident investment of African American money and African American brokered investments in enterprise and basic infrastructure facilities in African other African diasporan communities. And I want to go ahead and read this little part at the bottom. However, we do think that the African American community has the ability to achieve high levels of socio-political organization and economic growth, and along with them, high levels of Black power within the U.S. We believe that it can be exercised in such power in the U.S. and thereby in the world, that it will be able, in partnership with the rest of diasporan communities, to move the international community to invest in African peoples so as to help them become prosperous and influential members of the world community of nations.
Wow.
Ashe.
Ashe, ashe, ashe.
And back is that to that point, Sister Lee, we pointed out earlier on in the chapter, in order to help create a favorable investment climate in African diaspora nations and communities, the African American community must create its own stable and productive investment infrastructure.
That's right.
Question for the community. What resource can we use on Africa right now as those who live in the diaspora and those who live in Africa that we can use to, you know, to maybe set this off? Is there any resource you can think of that we could use to begin to apply some of the things that the Bible is talking about?
Well, one thing, let's look at what, say for instance, I haven't studied a lot on this brother's movement, but say brother, the musician, Akon, when he said, hey, let's go light all of Africa by just using solar energy. It was an initiative that I don't know, he probably got with a team. I don't know if he got with a team of Europeans or Africans to start this initiative, but he said, let's use the resources of solar energy in order to make this happen. Not just light up the city, light up the country, but also use that stored energy for other resources. So I mean, that's one way for sure.
But that would come into, we dealing with the plutocrats and the aristocrats who have big contracts, you know, in Africa for supplying, you know, electricity. That's what we're going to come against, you know, to keep, you know, to keep it real. That if we're going to bring solar into Africa, we're going to come against, you know, big corporations that are supplying. Yeah, it's a good idea.
That's just one aspect that it was as a natural resource that's on the continent. And I'm sure he had to go through political, you know, movements in order to make that happen.
Good idea. Definitely a good idea.
Yeah, but in order to plant on the land and also something we can trade, that takes a little bit more resources, a little bit more time that I wouldn't know. But that was just an example on how I believe it should look.
Because Africa has so many raw materials,
right?
That's available. Is it something that we can begin to, you know, manufacture, and begin to use and distribute that throughout the world? You know, begin to use its personal resources. Well, it's already there.
Sister Alima said it out earlier. They're a colonized country.
Yes.
Which rules and regulations were set on those natural resources.
Yes.
So in order to even infringe on them, there's going to be a lot of red tape.
That's right.
No way to get around that. We're going to have to go to war. Inevitable with the Europeans.
Yeah, that's the only way you're going to get it.
No way around it. Like the Vietnamese did with the French. The French had them the same way in Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese, they broke the hand of the French imperialism. That's what they did. They had the same situation of land controlling resources. Major corporations had they would work in slave wages and sweat infested companies. You know, less than $1 a day. But Mao Tse-tung and the North Vietnamese fought the revolution. Inevitable. The only way that I'm not saying any way around Africa is the inevitable is that they're gonna have to confront these motherfuckers. You know, it's just there's no way around it.
Right. Like you said, the resources are definitely plentiful. So
yeah. You know, like you said, it's easier said than done, of course.
But it's a process.
It is a process.
Absolutely.
Castro had to do it in Cuba. You know, the mafia had them. And Batista, they put the United States, the CIA was heavily financed by the CIA and the United States, and they was exploiting the people of Cuba. He did the same thing when they ousted Batista and that mafia. You know, they had to confront these people.
So like you guys said, no matter where we go, whether we repatriate, it doesn't matter. We're gonna have to fight. You know, we're gonna have to fight these folks, regardless of where we are.
There's no way around it. I think about it sometimes. No way around it.
Would you think it would be easier to put together natural resource plans on the continent than here in the States? Like as we know, there is an alternative for gasoline. You know, it's an alternative for oil. As you know, we can do corn and things like that. Things that can be grown plentiful on the continent.
Right.
You know, the oils they use, the palm nut, things of that nature. So I mean, so many things that may cost so much here and so much red tape.
Yes, very
the
true.
Resources, the soil, and all we had to do was get through the government, and maybe work out agreements and legal agreements in order to make that happen. But what it boils down to, we will have to figure out what to do and how to do it. You know, and right now we have just the red tape that's there, and maybe not knowing the right channel to go through. So, but it is an interesting talk, all of that, nonetheless.
Absolutely. So I know we held everybody for 2 hours. Sister Alima, where are you, sis? Where's my sister? Is she out of there? Like Sister Alima must have said, I'm gonna put she thinks she put the mic on mute. Sister Alima.
Yeah, she probably stepped out.
All right. All right, because I just wanted to, you know.
I'm here.
All right, sis, tell the family where to find you and where to grab.
Y'all can find me at lililapoetespeaks.com. That's where you want to go every week, family, to pick up the links. You can join us on the panel, or you can join us in the active discussion on YouTube. And you can go over to my site. You can subscribe. If you're not a subscriber, all new subscribers get 30% off their first order and free shipping. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, family. I'll have good coupons in there and poems of the day, different things like that. So subscribe at www.lililapoetespeaks.com. I am, once again, the author of Perceptions of a Misplaced African, Volume 1. Also available at the store. Check that out. Also check out some Meltrek. Check out Aaron Knows About Africa. Peace and love, family.
Peace and love.
Hey. Look, I normally do the whole spiel about Meltrek. You can go to edanimeproductions.com or go to Lili La Poete Speaks. I'm tired as hell, sis, right now. I'm burned out. So, you know.
I can tell you tired.
Yes, or you can Google Meltrek, and I'm sure it'll pop up in the engine. Please support family. Support the people on this panel. Support your brothers and sisters in the community. As Dr. Claude Anderson said, we need to start practicing group economics before we become a fifth-class citizen in this country. We need to start practicing group economics so that we can amass economical power, which will translate to political power. All right. So we got to start buying with each other. A lot of folks went out here, Sister Alima, Sister Camille, and brothers. They went out here. They spent thousands of dollars, hundreds of dollars. You know, Christmas and Kwanzaa, and I just wonder how much did they spend with their own brothers and sisters. So, you know, we got to start supporting each other. We got to start buying from each other. Yeah. Please support the folks on this panel.
My penis and you think I'm going to let somebody get a piece?
Peace, family. My name is Camille Gaynor Jones. Website www.camillegaynorjones.com. You can check out my CD, A Girl from Queens. I also have an instructional DVD. I'm an educator. I give drum lessons, production lessons. I also, you know, do the whole production gamut as well as live tours, etc., etc. And be on the panel with and Dr. Maat and Brother Travis and Brother Johnson. And I look forward to being here next week and seeing you all here. And thanks to everybody that's in the chat that came through and showed us some love. And please support all of our products. You know, we're about Black empowerment. We're trying to bring this knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to the family for our global health. Ashe and happy Kwanzaa.
Absolutely.
Peace.
Brother Travis, Brother T.
Hey, family, I'll see you next week. Happy Kwanzaa, and hope to hear from everyone soon.
Hey, Brother T, are we still doing Kwanzaa together, bro?
We are. We won't do it the first day because that's on Tuesday. What we want to do, we get in contact with you, maybe do collective economics.
You want to do a feast on the last day?
I'm looking at the feast on the last day. Would that be on Sunday, I believe? Or I think we can push for Sunday. Yeah, we can push for Sunday. That'd be good. Let's talk tomorrow.
Okay, because I'm excited. Man, when I say I'm excited, I have my canard, I got my candles, I got my corn, I have my cup, I got my red, black, and green spread. I'm gonna put the picture on Facebook. It'll be up
like we did last year.
So I'm excited, and my brother and I, we're like merging our tribes together to celebrate Kwanzaa. So it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, and so I'm looking forward to that. Definitely looking forward to Kwanzaa.
It's gonna happen.
No doubt, Brother Travis.
Peace, fam. This is Brother Travis out of Detroit. Again, this is another powerful meeting. I definitely enjoyed myself. A lot of great minds in this group. I just encourage the listening audience to chime in and become a part of this powerful group. I can see this group doing some powerful things. Hotel.
Ashe. All right, family. So we love you. Have a tomorrow morning. I'm telling y'all not tomorrow morning. At 12 o'clock noon Eastern Standard Time, I'm bringing Brother Kofi from the Session Medjunetta group. He'll be back on tomorrow. We're going to talk about the history of Christmas and the psychological, emotional, and financial impact that it has on African Americans and and our brothers and sisters, on the continent and in the diaspora. So we're going to go in tomorrow. I mean, we'll be talking about the winter solstice and capital gains made during the Christmas holidays. So the brother's going to go in. So please join us. It'll be 11 o'clock Central Time, but 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. So we're going live tomorrow. We're going to get it in. We're going to talk about the history of Christmas. We're going to go into, the racial iconography of Christmas with the white Santa and all of that. And I mean, we're going to the tree. And so we're going to break that whole thing down tomorrow. So join us tomorrow. Subscribe to the channel. You'll get a notification when we go live. So I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. If I don't, have a happy Kwanzaa, and I'll see you guys next Sunday. Peace and power.
Peace.
Peace and power.